The world had its eyes set on their imperfections, yet he saw only light. His story, and hers, began at a desolate train station, a place where destinies sometimes collided with the raw force of a prairie wind. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. The tracks shimmered under the unforgiving western sun, a metallic snake winding through the vast, indifferent landscape. Elias Thorne stood on the dusty platform, his frame gaunt, carved by the twin chisels of grief and hard living. A widower, a man hollowed out by loss, he had sought solace in the starkness of this land, hoping its emptiness would mirror his own and somehow, perhaps, ease it. But the emptiness only echoed louder. He watched the train pull in, a belching leviathan of steam and iron, carrying with it the faint scent of distant civilization and a promise, however fragile, of a new beginning. Mail-order brides were not uncommon in these parts. Women brave or desperate enough to journey into the unknown, chasing a flicker of hope. Elias had been neither brave nor desperate when he sent for one. He was simply tired. Tired of the silence in his cabin. Tired of the ghost that lingered in every shadow, every unturned page of the book he'd never finished reading to her. He watched the disembarking passengers, a blur of faces, until one figure stood out. She wasn't delicate, nor was she meek. Her silhouette was ample, a woman of substance, standing amidst the thin, wiry forms of the other travelers. A whisper, carried on the dry breeze, reached him from a group of men leaning against a water tower, their laughter like dry leaves skittering across the ground. Too fat, one drawled, spitting tobacco juice. The words, though not meant for him, struck Elias with an odd force. He felt a familiar hollowness in his chest, a sensation he knew intimately from watching his own wife wither away, consumed by an unseen malady until nothing but bone and spirit remained. He knew what it meant to be judged by the superficial, by what the eye could not perceive. This woman, standing alone, her gaze sweeping the horizon with a quiet defiance, held a different kind of truth. He saw not a physical flaw, but a resilience, a solidity that felt profoundly, almost brutally real. The dusty air tasted of anticipation and something heavier, the weight of choices made in haste, of lives tethered by fragile threads. He took a hesitant step forward, his boots stirring the red earth, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds, met his, and in their depths he saw not the weary resignation of the mail-order bride, but a flicker of a wilder, untamed spirit. He approached her, the dust clinging to his boots like old memories. Her name was Martha, she said, her voice surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to the robust frame that stood before him. The train's whistle wailed a mournful goodbye, leaving them isolated on the platform, surrounded by the vast, indifferent land. He saw the faint blush on her cheeks, not of embarrassment, but of quiet anticipation, perhaps even a flicker of apprehension. The judgmental whispers of the men by the water tower seemed to fade, replaced by the rhythmic beat of his own heart. He noted the way her fingers, though large, were gracefully intertwined, betraying a hidden delicacy. The mail-order catalog had promised a sturdy woman, capable of frontier life, a description that felt chillingly impersonal. But in her eyes, Elias saw more than capability. He saw an ocean of unspoken stories, a quiet strength that resonated with the gnawing ache in his own soul. He thought of Sarah, his late wife, fragile and fading, her spirit dwindling with each passing day like a flickering candle. Sarah had been beauty, refined and delicate, but her beauty had been no shield against the brutal indifference of the world, nor against the insidious sickness that had claimed her. Looking at Martha, he felt a strange sense of grounding. Her presence was solid, unwavering, like the ancient oaks that dotted the distant hills. He extended his hand, calloused and rough, accustomed to the plow and the rifle, but trembling almost imperceptibly. "Elias Thorne," he mumbled, his voice hoarse from disuse. Her hand in his was warm, firm, not hesitant. It was a simple touch, yet in that brief connection, a current passed between them, an acknowledgement of something deeper than the superficial judgments of others. He saw the way she looked at the landscape, not with fear, but with a quiet curiosity, as if seeking to understand its rhythms, its secrets. The sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows across the plains, turning the dust to molten gold. A lone hawk circled overhead, its cry a piercing lament against the vast silence. He imagined the starkness of his cabin, the echoing emptiness, the lingering scent of Sarah's lavender sachet. He had sent for a woman out of necessity, a need for a presence, any presence, to ward off the encroaching darkness of his solitude. But Martha was more than a presence. She was an unyielding force, a contradiction in a world that demanded uniformity. "You're Elias?" she asked, her voice steady, searching his eyes for something he wasn't sure he possessed anymore. "The one who sent for me?" Her directness was disarming. He nodded, feeling a strange clarity cut through the haze of his grief. This was not the delicate flower he had lost, but perhaps exactly what he needed to survive. He needed solidity, not fragility. He needed an anchor, not another drift. The silence that followed was not empty. It was pregnant with unspoken questions, with the weight of two disparate lives suddenly intersecting. Elias looked at Martha, really looked at her, beyond the judgments of others, beyond the crude simplicity of the mail order arrangement. He saw the faint lines of weariness around her eyes, etched there by struggles unknown to him, but instantly recognizable. He saw a quiet dignity in her posture, a resilience that spoke louder than any catalog description. The air, heavy with the scent of sagebrush and distant dust, seemed to hum with an unacknowledged tension. He thought of his farm, the acres of land he worked alone, the meals he ate in silence, the long nights spent staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories. He needed a partner, not just a wife. He needed someone to stand beside him, not just within the house, but within the very fabric of his fragmented life. He knew what people would say. They would talk of the quick marriage, of her sighs, of his haste. But the opinions of the town, of the gossiping women, and the sneering men, felt distant, irrelevant. His grief had forged an impenetrable wall around him, a barrier against the casual cruelty of the world. He had nothing left to lose, and perhaps everything to gain. "Martha," he began, his voice rough, "I know this ain't how most folks do things, but there's a justice of the peace in town, not far." His words hung in the air, blunt and unadorned, stripped of all romantic pretense. He wasn't offering her a whirlwind romance or a fairy tale. He was offering her a partnership in survival, a shared solitude. He was offering her a place where she would not be judged for the size of her frame, but for the strength of her spirit. He watched her face for a reaction, for a flicker of surprise or indignation. Instead, her eyes, those storm cloud eyes, remained steady, searching his, probing for the honesty beneath his words. He saw a flash of understanding, a recognition of the raw desperation that drove him, and in that recognition, he felt a strange, unburdening sense of relief. She understood that this was not about love. Not yet. It was about need. It was about carving out a shared existence in a harsh world. "Today?" she asked, her voice a quiet murmur. But there was no hesitation in it, only a pragmatic acceptance. The question was not one of refusal, but of confirmation, a test of his resolve. Elias nodded, his throat tight. Today. The word felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of their combined futures. He didn't know why he was doing this, not truly. Part of it was the profound weariness of loneliness. Part of it was a desperate longing for something solid, something real, to hold on to in a world that felt increasingly ephemeral. But there was also a quiet, almost imperceptible current of hope, a fragile seed planted in the desolate ground of his heart. She had come to him, an unknown woman carrying her own burdens, and in her quiet strength, he saw a chance for something new, something that might finally allow him to breathe again. The ceremony was brief, almost brutally so, held in the dusty office of the Justice of the Peace, whose eyes, Elias noted, lingered on Martha with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. The words were a dry rattle, a legal formality against the vast, emotional chasm they both carried. There were no flowers, no witnesses, save for a bewildered stable hand who was called in to sign as a formality, smelling faintly of horse and hay. Elias felt a profound irony in the swiftness of it all. His first marriage had been a celebration, a promise whispered under a canopy of stars, witnessed by a joyful community. This one was a stark pronouncement, a commitment born of mutual desperation and the unspoken recognition of a shared weariness. When the justice pronounced them man and wife, the words felt hollow, like stones dropped into an empty well. Yet, when Elias looked at Martha, her eyes, though shadowed, held a steady resolve. She wasn't seeking grand gestures, she was seeking a place, a purpose, and perhaps a respite from her own long, lonely journey. The townsfolk, word having traveled faster than any stagecoach, offered no congratulations, only whispers and averted glances. The crude comment, "too fat," seemed to echo in the dusty air. A silent judgment passed by those who saw only the surface, never the depths. They saw a widower marrying a woman who didn't fit their narrow definition of beauty, a union born of pragmatism rather than passion, and they condemned it with their silence and their stares. Elias felt a familiar resentment simmer within him. He had faced their judgment before, when Sarah had died. A hushed pity that felt more like accusation. He had come to despise their facile compassion, their superficial understanding of suffering. Martha, he noticed, seemed oblivious to their scrutiny, or perhaps simply immune to it. Her gaze was fixed forward, resolute, as if she had long ago built walls against the harshness of the world. This quiet fortitude was a revelation to Elias. He, who had buckled under the weight of his own grief, found an unexpected strength in her stoicism. As they stepped out of the justice's office, the sun beat down relentlessly, a symbol of the harsh reality they now faced together. Their marriage was not a beginning of joy, but a fragile bridge across a chasm of sorrow. They returned to his small, weather-beaten cabin, a silent, almost ritualistic journey. The cabin, which had always felt like a tomb since Sarah's passing, now held a new, uncertain presence. He opened the door, a creaking lament, and gestured her inside. The air within was stale, thick with the scent of old wood smoke and unspoken grief. This was not a home, it was merely a shelter. And yet, as Martha stepped across the threshold, a faint, almost imperceptible shift occurred. The darkness inside seemed to recede, if only by a sly odor, as if her presence, substantial and grounded, had brought with it a flicker of light, a fragile, nascent hope in the profound, consuming silence. The heavy weight of the future pressed down, but for the first time in a long time, Elias felt a strange, unsettling sense of something other than despair. Life with Martha settled into a rhythm, stark and unadorned, like the landscape outside their cabin. The days were long, filled with the back-breaking labor of the farm, and the nights were longer still, stretched taut by the uncomfortable silence that often filled the small, close space. Elias watched her, a study in quiet observation. She worked without complaint, her hands, surprisingly nimble despite their size, tending to the small garden he had neglected, mending torn clothes with meticulous stitches, and preparing simple, nourishing meals. He noticed the steady strength in her movements, the unyielding purpose in her gaze. She never asked for anything, never demanded, never intruded upon the vast, echoing chambers of his grief. This unspoken respect for his solitude was a balm, yet it also created a new kind of tension, a chasm of unaddressed emotions. He would often find himself staring at the empty chair by the fireplace, Sarah's chair, a phantom presence that haunted his peripheral vision. A sharp, stinging pang of memory would pierce him. Sarah's laughter, like wind chimes in the prairie breeze, her delicate touch on his arm, the soft murmur of her voice as she read aloud from a worn book. The contrast with Martha, so grounded, so materially present, was jarring. He remembered Sarah's slow decline, the way her life force had seemed to seep away, leaving behind only the ghost of her former self. He had watched, helpless, as she wasted away, her beauty dissolving into fragile transparency. He had hated his helplessness, hated the way life could simply extinguish a flame so bright. This memory was a raw, open wound, a constant presence that colored his every interaction. One evening, as the last sliver of sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, Elias found Martha sitting on the porch, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of land. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to bridge the silence, to offer some fragment of himself. But the words caught in his throat, choked by the years of unexpressed sorrow. He carried a heavy burden, a past that lay like a stone in his gut. And he knew, instinctively, that she carried her own. He saw the way her shoulders seemed to hold the weight of something unseen, the way her eyes, even when calm, held a trace of a deeply held sadness. The societal judgment, the too fat whispers, had been just the surface. He began to understand that her substantial form was not just a physical characteristic, but perhaps a metaphor, a protective shell around a vulnerability that she had learned to shield from a cruel world. He felt the ironic bite of it. The world had seen her as too much, while he had learned that often there was never enough. Enough time, enough love, enough life. The quiet, unspoken pact between them continued, a delicate dance around the edges of their shared loneliness. Yet, cracks began to appear in the facade of their self-imposed silence, revealing glimpses of the struggles that had shaped them. Elias found himself observing Martha more closely, noticing the small details, the scar above her left eyebrow, almost hidden by a stray curl, the way she hummed a tuneless melody while kneading dough, the gentle way she spoke to the stray dog that occasionally ventured near their cabin. He began to understand that her substantial build, which others had so readily disparaged, was not a burden but a foundation, a robust frame built to withstand the buffetings of a harsh existence. He remembered, with a pang, his own youth, a time before grief had leached the color from his world, before he had become a silhouette against the fading light. He had been a man of quiet contentment, working his land, sharing laughter with Sarah. Now, the laughter felt like a foreign language. He found himself, on some nights, rising from his cot, drawn by the sound of Martha's soft movements. Once, he saw her sitting by the faint glow of the dying embers, meticulously mending a piece of worn cloth. Her face, softened by the low light, held a contemplative expression, a profound sadness that seemed to mirror his own. He felt a sharp, unexpected urge to reach out, to ask her about the journey that had brought her to his desolate doorstep. But the words faltered. The habit of silence was too deeply ingrained. He carried a memory, a flashback to Sarah's last days, a moment of profound despair when he had watched her slip away, her eyes, once so vibrant, dimming like distant stars. He remembered the doctor's hollow words, the helpless shrugs, the slow, agonizing realization that nothing he did could save her. This memory was a ghost that walked beside him, a constant reminder of his own powerlessness. He had come to equate fragility with loss, beauty with an ephemeral fleetingness. Martha, in her very presence, challenged this ingrained fear. One morning, as they worked silently in the garden, the sun already searing the tender shoots, a shadow fell over them. Old Man Hemlock, a wizened, sour-faced neighbor, stood at the edge of their property, his gaze lingering on Martha with an almost predatory curiosity. "Heard you finally got yourself a woman, Thorne?" he rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Didn't take you long to replace Sarah." The words, loaded with insidious meaning, struck Elias like a physical blow. He felt a surge of cold fury, a familiar defensiveness rising within him. But before he could retort, Martha, without looking up from her work, spoke. Her voice was calm, devoid of any emotional tremor, yet it carried an undeniable strength that silenced Hemlock's sneer. "Some voids cannot be replaced, sir," she said, her hands continuing their work, "only redefined." Her words, simple yet profound, hung in the air, a testament to her quiet fortitude, a defiance that Elias hadn't known she possessed. He saw the surprise in Hemlock's eyes, the fleeting discomfort before he grunted and shuffled away, his judgmental presence retreating into the shimmering heat. A new layer of mystery settled around Martha, a quiet power he was only just beginning to perceive, and with it, a faint, undeniable pull towards understanding her. Martha's quiet retort to Old Man Hemlock resonated in Elias's mind, a ripple in the stagnant waters of his life. "Some voids cannot be replaced, only redefined." The phrase echoed with a profound wisdom, revealing a depth to her character that surpassed his initial, pragmatic assessment. He began to see her not just as a presence, a practical necessity, but as an individual, a woman shaped by her own battles, her own losses. He wondered about her journey, not just the physical distance she had traveled, but the emotional landscape she had navigated to arrive at his desolate doorstep. One evening, as the lantern cast long, dancing shadows on the cabin walls, Elias found himself watching her as she stitched a patch onto his worn work shirt. The rhythmic pull of the needle, the focused intensity in her eyes, held a quiet fascination. He saw a flicker of something in her gaze, a fleeting shadow, and then it was gone. "Why did you come, Martha?" he asked, the words surprising even himself, breaking the unspoken rule of their silence. Her hands paused, the needle suspended in midair. She didn't look at him immediately. The flame of the lantern seemed to dim for a moment, then brightened, casting her face in stark relief. Her profile, usually so stoic, softened, revealing a vulnerability he had not yet witnessed. "There was nowhere else for me," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, laden with a weary resignation that pierced him. "My family. They believed I was a burden." She paused, and he saw her swallow, a visible effort. "My size. It was a constant reminder of my unsuitability, in their eyes, for marriage, for a proper life. I was always too much, or not enough. I was an obligation." The bluntness of her confession hung heavy in the air, a mirror to the casual cruelty he had witnessed at the station. "They sought to marry me off as a convenience, a problem to be solved. When that failed, they saw me as an endless expense, a mouth to feed without purpose." She looked at him then, her eyes direct, unwavering. "This advertisement, it offered a purpose, a place where I was needed, not merely tolerated." Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He recognized the pain in her voice, the quiet humiliation, because he had experienced his own version of it. The subtle judgment, the pitying glances, the whispers that implied he was incomplete without Sarah. She, too, had been discarded, deemed unworthy by societal standards. The irony was a bitter taste on his tongue. They had both been broken in different ways, cast aside by a world that valued superficial appearances over true worth. He saw the depth of her resilience, the strength it must have taken to forge a path alone, to venture into the unknown rather than remain in a place that diminished her spirit. The too fat label wasn't just a physical descriptor. It was a brand, a mark of societal rejection that she carried, yet had somehow transformed into a quiet dignity. Her story was not just about survival, but about a defiant reclamation of self, a journey to find a place where her inherent worth was recognized, even if it was in the most unlikely of unions, forged in the crucible of mutual desperation. The fragile threads of their shared past, now revealed, began to bind them in a new, uncomfortable intimacy. Elias found himself thinking of Martha's words, "my size." It was a constant reminder of my unsuitability. He understood, in a visceral way, the burden of being judged by what one appeared to be, rather than who one was. He, too, had worn the cloak of public perception. The stoic widower, the man lost in grief. It was a suffocating garment, and he saw that Martha had shed her own piece by painful piece on her journey to his desolate farm. The tension in the cabin, once a wall between them, softened into a charged silence. One sun-baked afternoon, a dispute erupted at the general store, a common occurrence in the small, insular town. Elias had gone to collect supplies, Martha accompanying him, a rare venture outside their isolated existence. A group of local ranchers, their faces weathered and their voices loud, were arguing over a land dispute, their tempers frayed by the unrelenting heat. One of them, a man named Granger, known for his belligerence and quick temper, bumped into Martha, sending a small sack of flour tumbling to the dusty floor. He didn't apologize. Instead, his eyes, dark and contemptuous, swept over her substantial figure. "Watch where you're going, woman," he snarled, a sneer twisting his lips. "You take up enough space without blocking the whole aisle." The words were like a slap, raw and crude, carrying the unspoken cruelty of the too fat judgment. Elias felt an ancient rage coil in his gut, a protective instinct he hadn't known he still possessed. He remembered how he had stood by, helpless, as Sarah withered. He would not stand by again. His hand instinctively went to his side, where a pistol usually rested, but he had left it at home. his fists clenched. Martha, however, did not flinch. Her eyes, usually so steady, narrowed, and a flicker of something Elias recognized as dangerous passed through them. "My apologies, sir," she said, her voice low, controlled, yet imbued with an iron-hard quality he hadn't heard before. "But this aisle is wide enough for fair-minded folk. Perhaps it is your own narrowness that creates the obstruction." A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Granger's face purpled, his fists clenching. He lunged forward, but Elias stepped in front of Martha, a silent, unyielding wall. "That's enough, Granger," Elias growled, his voice a low rumble, filled with a menace that surprised even himself. "You'll apologize to my wife." The word wife felt foreign on his tongue, yet it carried an unexpected weight, a fierce sense of possession and protection. The confrontation hung heavy in the air, a delicate balance between escalation and retreat. Granger hesitated, caught off guard by Elias's sudden ferocity. The store owner, a nervous man, cleared his throat loudly. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring, then snapped. Granger, seeing the unwavering resolve in Elias's eyes, backed down, muttering curses under his breath as he stomped out of the store. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension, but also with a newfound respect. Elias turned to Martha, his chest heaving, his heart pounding a furious rhythm. He saw the quiet strength in her eyes, a reflection of the fire that had flared in his own. In that charged moment, something shifted irrevocably between them. They were no longer just two individuals bound by necessity. They were allies, facing the world together, their imperfections a shared shield against its judgments. The confrontation at the general store, a raw public display of their nascent solidarity, solidified something profound between Elias and Martha. The raw anger that had surged through Elias was not just born of protectiveness for his wife, but of a deep-seated frustration with the world's callous indifference, a frustration that had festered since Sarah's death. He realized in that moment that Martha was not just a practical replacement, but a living, breathing testament to resilience, a challenge to the very notion of superficial worth. He saw how the "too fat" label, once a source of humiliation for her, had become a symbol of her defiance, her refusal to be diminished. The dusty walk back to the cabin was filled with a new kind of silence, one that was no longer empty, but pregnant with unspoken understanding. The sun beat down, relentlessly baking the earth, and the landscape seemed to shimmer, blurring the lines between reality and memory. Elias felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to unburden himself, to cast off the suffocating shroud of grief that had clung to him for so long. They sat on the porch as dusk painted the sky in shades of deep indigo and fiery orange. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the sweet aroma of wild honeysuckle. He looked at Martha, her silhouette softened by the twilight, and saw not just a woman, but a mirror reflecting his own pain, his own hidden strengths. "Sarah, she was beautiful," he began, his voice rough, unused to speaking of her. "Fragile, like a wildflower, and I watched her fade. I couldn't save her." The words were torn from him, ripped from the deepest parts of his soul, raw and unvarnished. His hands clenched into fists, resting on his knees, trembling faintly. He remembered the last breath, the sudden stillness, the horrifying finality. He had held her hand, felt the cold seep into her fingertips, and a part of him had died with her. He had carried that death, that sense of failure, like a stone in his chest, allowing it to define him, to carve him into the hollow man he had become. "I was angry," he continued, the admission, a quiet tremor in the still air. "Angry at God, at the world, at myself, for not being strong enough, for not being enough." Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in his eyes, blurring the distant horizon. He hadn't cried in years, not truly. Grief had hardened into a cold, desolate wasteland. Martha remained silent, her presence a steady anchor. She didn't offer platitudes, didn't try to comfort him with empty words. She simply listened, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky, allowing him the space to finally break, to shed the crushing weight he had carried alone for so long. Her stillness was more comforting than any embrace. The memory of Sarah's ethereal beauty, once a source of poignant longing, now felt intertwined with a crushing sense of loss. a reminder of everything he couldn't protect. He looked at Martha's solid, grounded form, and saw not a contrast, but a different kind of strength, one that could perhaps withstand the brutal indifference of the world. In that moment, he understood the profound irony. He had married a woman deemed too much by society, in his own desperate bid to escape the pain of having too little. Her presence, her quiet strength, her very corporeal being, offered a chance for him to find a new kind of solace, not in forgetting Sarah, but in finally, truly, beginning to heal. The raw vulnerability Elias had shown, the shattering of his long-held grief, was a profound shift in their shared world. The quiet that followed was not one of discomfort, but of a deep, resonant understanding. Martha reached out, her hand settling gently on his arm, a touch that was firm, grounding, yet imbued with a profound empathy. He didn't flinch. Her touch was not the delicate, fleeting caress he remembered, but something more substantial, more real, like the earth beneath his feet. "We all carry our ghosts, Elias," she said, her voice soft, a low murmur against the vast quiet of the prairie night. "Some are beautiful, some are cruel, but they whisper to us, nonetheless." Her words, simple yet profoundly evocative, hung in the air, a testament to her own endured suffering. She didn't press for details, didn't demand an accounting of her own past, but her statement was an implicit acknowledgement of her own burdens. He saw the faint shadows in her eyes, reflections of her own hidden battles, her own wounds. He understood then that her journey to him wasn't merely a desperate escape from a world that had deemed her unworthy. It was also a pilgrimage toward a place where she could finally find peace, a place where her too-muchness was not only accepted but perhaps even valued. He had looked at her substantial frame, seen by others as a flaw, and now understood it as a symbol of her resilience, her unyielding spirit. It was the irony of it all, the painful humor in the world's blindness. They, two bruised souls, discarded and judged, had found an unexpected haven in each other. The stars, countless and indifferent, began to prick the inky canvas of the sky, each a distant, burning truth. Elias felt a profound weariness, but it was not the soul-crushing exhaustion of grief. It was the weariness of a battle fought, a fortress finally breached. He felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders, a stone dislodged from his heart. The air was cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant promise of rain. He finally looked at Martha, truly saw her, not as the too-fat bride, not as a replacement for Sarah, but as Martha, a woman of strength and quiet dignity, a fellow survivor. Her eyes, those storm cloud eyes, held a depth of compassion he hadn't imagined possible. "I lost Sarah," he whispered, the words no longer tearing at his throat, but flowing with a strange sense of release. "And for so long, I believed I lost myself with her." He felt the gentle squeeze of Martha's hand on his arm, a silent affirmation, a balm to his raw wounds. "But I think I'm finding pieces of myself again. Here, with you." He didn't know what the future held. There would be more challenges, more whispers, more moments of doubt. But in that moment, under the vast indifferent sky, a fragile seed of hope, long dormant, began to unfurl its first tentative leaf. The darkness was not gone, but it was no longer consuming. It was simply a part of the landscape, against which their burgeoning, unlikely connection shone, a quiet beacon in the vast, unforgiving expanse. The sunrise painted the horizon in hues of rose and gold, a tender awakening after the profound release of the night. Elias felt a quiet lightness he hadn't known in years, a subtle shift in the very fabric of his being. The weight of Sarah's ghost, though still present, no longer felt suffocating. It was a memory, tender and poignant, rather than an open wound. He watched Martha prepare breakfast, her movements fluid and purposeful. The small cabin, once a tomb of silence, now held a new, quiet hum of life. There was no grand declaration of love, no sudden surge of romantic passion. Their connection was built on something far more grounded, more enduring: shared vulnerability, mutual understanding, and a quiet, steadfast resilience forged in the crucible of their respective sorrows. The judgment of the town, the casual cruelty of people like Granger, still existed, a constant undercurrent. But it no longer held the same power. Elias had faced his deepest fear, the loss of his beloved Sarah, and had emerged on the other side, not whole, but willing to heal. Martha had found a place where her inherent worth was recognized, where her too muchness was not a flaw, but a testament to her strength, a tangible anchor in a world that often demanded fragility. They continued to work the land, their days filled with the rhythmic labor of farming, but now there was a different quality to their shared efforts, a sense of purpose, a quiet companionship that deepened with each passing day. He found himself seeking her gaze, finding not just solace, but a profound understanding in her steady eyes. He learned of her quiet joys, a particularly vibrant sunset, the robust growth of a seedling, the contented purr of the stray cat she had begun to feed. And she, in turn, learned of his, the satisfaction of a perfectly plowed furrow, the solace of a long, silent ride across the plains, the quiet comfort of a shared meal. The irony was a persistent whisper. The world had seen her as too fat, a burden, undesirable. Yet, it was her very solidity, her unwavering presence, her refusal to be diminished, that had become the unexpected cornerstone of his own fragile recovery. She was not a fleeting shadow, but a mountain, unmoving against the changing winds, offering him shelter, offering him a new kind of home. Their marriage, born of desperation and practicality, had blossomed into something profound, a testament to the fact that true connection often lay beyond the superficial, beyond the dictates of societal norms. It was a silent story, told in the unspoken glances, the shared burdens, the quiet understanding that passed between them. The hope in their resolution was not a bright, triumphant fanfare, but a deep, abiding quiet, a peaceful knowing that after the long, dark night, the sun had indeed risen, bringing with it the promise of a new, uncertain, but shared day. Their journey was not over, but it had begun anew. Two broken souls finding wholeness in the most unlikely of unions, a quiet defiance against a world that had once deemed them both unworthy.